The moment Ethan Graves felt his knees unlock, time fractured into something slow and merciless. 20 executives sat frozen around the glass conference table on the 42nd floor of Thornton Industries, their eyes tracking his descent like predators watching wounded prey. The numbers on the projection screen behind him doubled, then tripled, swimming in his vision like debris in floodwater. His tablet slipped from fingers that had forgotten how to grip. The carpet rushed up to meet him, except it didn't because Grace Thornton moved. She shouldn't have been close enough to catch him. The CEO stood 15 feet away at the head of the table, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Philadelphia's steel and glass canyon. But she crossed that distance in 3 strides, her charcoal suit jacket whispering against silk as she pivoted, adjusted, and took his full weight against her shoulder without stumbling. The room held its collective breath. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone waited for the explosion that never came. Grace Thornton's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel through skin. "Everyone out!" Not a request. The executives scattered like roaches when the lights flip on, gathering laptops and portfolios with the desperate efficiency of people who understood that disobedience meant consequences they couldn't afford. The door clicked shut behind the last VP, leaving only the sound of Ethan's ragged breathing and the muted hum of the city 42 stories below. His head still rested against her shoulder. The fabric of her suit smelled like bergamot, and something else he couldn't name, something clean and expensive and utterly foreign to a man who'd been wearing the same 2 shirts on rotation for 6 months. Shame flooded his system, hot and acidic. "I'm sorry." The words scraped out of his throat. "I'm so sorry, How long since you slept properly?" The question landed soft but unavoidable. Ethan tried to pull away to stand on legs that felt like water, but her hand came to rest on his shoulder with just enough pressure to keep him in place. "I'm fine. Just need a minute." "Mr. Graves." Her voice dropped lower, something in it that sounded almost like concern, which made no sense because Grace Thornton didn't do concern. "How long?" The numbers assembled themselves in his mind with the precision of a man who'd been counting survival in hours for so long it had become reflex. 4 hours. In the last 3 days. Grace went very still. Her hand stayed on his shoulder, steady as bedrock. "Your daughter. What's her name?" The shift in topic should have surprised him. It didn't. Everything about this moment existed outside the normal rules of reality, so why not this too? "Lily. She's 7. And last night—" Ethan closed his eyes. The memory played behind his lids with perfect clarity. Lily sitting up in bed at 2 in the morning, her small face pale in the nightlight's glow, tears tracking silent paths down her cheeks. Nightmares. About her mother. "When did you lose your wife?" 4 years, 2 months, and 17 days. But who was counting? 4 years ago, Rebecca. She was 33. Grace's breathing changed something in the rhythm that suggested she was choosing her next words with the care of someone defusing a bomb. How did she die? The question every widower dreads, because the answer never gets easier, never stops feeling like swallowing broken glass. Cancer, they said. The bitterness leaked through despite his best efforts. Stage 4 lung cancer. Never smoked a day in her life. Doctors called it bad luck, genetic lottery, one of those things. He opened his eyes, stared at the skyline beyond the windows. But it wasn't luck. It was exposure, chemical exposure. She worked as a lab technician for 3 years at Ashford Chemical, TCE, contamination in the ventilation system. They knew. They always knew. The hand on his shoulder tightened, just fractionally. Ashford Chemical. Grace repeated the name like she was tasting poison. Malcolm Ashford's company. Something in her tone made Ethan's spine straighten despite the exhaustion weighing him down like wet concrete. He pulled back enough to see her face. Grace Thornton at 38 had built a reputation on control, on the kind of ice-water composure that made grown men stammer in board meetings. But right now, standing close enough that he could count the gold flecks in her dark eyes, Ethan watched that control crack. "You know him?" Not a question. Her expression answered before her mouth opened. "He's on my board." Has been for 12 years, since my father was alive. The words hit Ethan like a fist to the solar plexus. The air in the conference room suddenly felt too thin, too hot. You're bored. The factory I'm acquiring. Grace's voice had gone flat professional, the tone she used when delivering bad quarterly projections. The environmental assessment you were presenting when you collapsed. That facility is Ashford's subsidiary, Ashford Medical Supplies. He owns 40% of the voting shares. The room tilted again, but this time Ethan's vision stayed clear. His engineering brain, the part that had gone dormant 4 years ago when he couldn't stand to look at structural plans without seeing the building that killed his wife, kicked into gear with the grinding efficiency of machinery that had been sitting idle too long. You're buying a facility owned by the man who killed Rebecca. I didn't know. The crack in Grace's composure widened. I didn't know about your wife. I didn't know about the contamination. The due diligence report listed minor environmental concerns, nothing that couldn't be remediated. Minor concerns. Ethan heard his voice rise, heard the edge of something dangerous creeping in. Rebecca died choking on her own lungs. 33 years old. Our daughter was 3. She doesn't remember her mother's face without looking at pictures. Grace stepped back, putting professional distance between them, but her eyes never left his. How many others? The question caught him off guard. What? Rebecca wasn't the only one. Chemical exposure doesn't kill in isolation. How many others died? Ethan's throat closed. He'd spent 4 years trying not to think about this, trying to wall off the knowledge behind the fortress of grief and survival, and the desperate scramble to keep Lily fed and housed and safe. 247 confirmed cases. Lung cancer, liver failure, kidney disease. They settled with 47 families in 2020. $50,000 each. Non-disclosure agreements. No admission of guilt. His hands clenched into fists. I signed one. Took the money because I had a 3-year-old daughter and $16,000 in medical debt and no job because I couldn't function. I signed away the right to speak Rebecca's name in court for $50,000. The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff that moment before the fall, where gravity hasn't quite caught up with inevitability. Grace Thornton walked to the window, her back to him, her reflection ghost pale in the glass. Go home, Mr. Graves. The dismissal landed like a punch. Of course. He'd just confessed to having signed an NDA with a man on her board, had essentially accused her company of complicity, had collapsed in the middle of a critical presentation. Why wouldn't she fire him? I understand. I'll clean out my desk. You'll go home. She didn't turn around. Take 3 days. Paid. I'm locking your system access so you can't work remotely. When you come back Thursday, we're going to talk about Ashford. Everything you know. Everything you suspect. Every document you signed. Ethan stared at her reflection in the window. The city spread out behind her like a promise or a threat, depending on how you looked at it. Why would you do that? Now she turned, and the expression on her face wasn't the ice queen the office whispered about. It was something raw, something that looked almost like rage. Because my father built this company on partnerships with men like Malcolm Ashford. Because I've spent the last 6 years trying to clean up his legacy, and apparently I've been doing it blind. Because you just told me I'm about to acquire a facility that's killed at least 200 people, and if I don't stop it, I'm complicit in whoever dies next. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had gone quiet. And because your daughter deserves a father who isn't killing himself with exhaustion and guilt. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them seemed ready to examine. I don't need charity. Good. I don't give charity. I give fair compensation for value provided. You have information I need. I have resources you lack. We can help each other. She moved to her desk, pulled out a card, handed it to him. My personal cell. Text me when you get home. And Ethan. The use of his first name should have felt inappropriate. Instead, it felt like an anchor. Yeah. Your daughter. What does she think happened to her mother? The question hit harder than it should have. Ethan thought about last night, about Lily's small face in the dark, her voice breaking on the question she'd asked 100 times in 100 different ways. She thinks bad people made bad chemicals and Mommy got sick because nobody stopped them. That's the truth. She asked me if the bad people know what they did. Ethan's voice cracked. I told her yes, but the truth is they don't care. They settled lawsuits and moved on, and they're still making the same chemicals in the same facilities with the same ventilation systems. Grace's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in her cheek. Then we make them care. The certainty in her voice should have sounded naive. Instead, it sounded like a declaration of war. Ethan left the office in a fog, Grace's card burning a hole in his pocket. The elevator ride down 42 floors felt like descending into another world, one where the laws of physics still applied and CEOs didn't catch collapsing employees and ask about dead wives and offer alliances against billionaire board members. Marcus Grace's driver waited in the lobby with the kind of professional detachment that suggested he'd been briefed. The ride to Ethan's apartment in northeast Philadelphia passed in silence, the city sliding by the tinted windows like scenes from someone else's life. Row houses gave way to neighborhoods where chain-link fences separated tiny yards, and corner stores advertised check-cashing services and lottery tickets. Lily met him at the door, her backpack still on from school pickup, her face lighting up with surprise that gutted him. "Daddy, you're home early." 7 years old, and she already knew. Early meant something wrong, something broken in the routine they'd built from the wreckage of Rebecca's death. "Yeah, baby. Thought I'd surprise you." She studied him with the unnerving perception of children who'd learned too young to read adults for signs of incoming disaster. "Are you sick?" "Just tired. Come here." Lily crashed into him with the full-body trust of childhood, her arms wrapping around his waist, her head pressed against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. Ethan held her and tried not to think about Grace Thornton's voice asking how many others died, about Malcolm Ashford's name on a board roster, about 247 people who'd breathed poison because profit margins mattered more than ventilation systems. "Mrs. Patterson said you called during math class." Lily pulled back, her expression serious. "She said you sounded worried." Guilt twisted in Ethan's gut. He'd called the school in a panic at 2 p.m. when Grace had insisted he leave immediately, terrified that something had happened to Lily while he was busy collapsing in front of 20 executives. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm always okay at school. You know that." She cocked her head, considering. "You look sad. Sadder than normal sad." Christ. When had his baseline become sad enough that his 7-year-old daughter had gradations for it? "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a long day." "Are you telling me truth or what I want to hear?" The question, delivered in Lily's clear child's voice, hit like a sledgehammer. It was one of Rebecca's phrases, something she'd said to Ethan in their early days when he'd tried to sugarcoat bad news. "Where did you learn that?" "Mommy used to say it. I remember." Lily's eyes, Rebecca's eyes, met his with uncomfortable directness. "Mrs. Patterson says people lie to kids because they think we can't handle truth. But lies are worse because then we imagine scary things that aren't even real." Ethan sank onto the couch, pulling Lily with him. She curled against his side, warm and solid and alive, everything good he'd managed to protect from the wreckage. "You're right. The truth is, I met someone today who might be able to help us understand what happened to Mommy." Lily went very still. "The bad people who made the chemicals?" "Maybe. I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out." "Will it bring Mommy back?" The question every grieving parent dreads because the answer tears your heart out every single time. "No, baby. Nothing can do that." Then why does it matter? Ethan thought about Grace Thornton standing in her glass tower, about her voice going hard as steel when she said, "We make them care," about 247 people dead and facilities still running, and $50,000 settlements that bought silence but not justice. Because there are other mommies and daddies working in buildings like where Mommy worked, and if we don't stop the bad people, those mommies and daddies might get sick too. More kids like you might lose their parents. Lily processed this with the gravity of a child who understood loss in her bones. "So you'd be helping them, the other kids?" "Yeah. That's what Mommy would want. She was always helping people." Lily's voice went small. I wish I remembered her better. Ethan's throat closed. He pulled his daughter closer, pressed his face against her hair that smelled like strawberry shampoo and childhood and everything he'd managed to keep safe. She loved you more than anything in the world. She used to sing to you every night. Blackbird by the Beatles. You'd fall asleep before she finished the first verse. I know. You told me. Lily's fingers twisted in his shirt. But knowing isn't the same as remembering. No, it wasn't. And that was another thing Ashford Chemical had stolen, another thing $50,000 couldn't buy back. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number that resolved into Grace Thornton's contact when he opened it. Did you make it home safely? Ethan stared at the message. When was the last time anyone had asked him that? When was the last time anyone had checked whether he'd survived the journey from point A to point B? He typed back one-handed. Lily still pressed against his side. Yes. Thank you. The response came within seconds. Good. Rest tonight. Don't think about work. Don't think about Ashford. Just be with your daughter. We'll talk Thursday. A pause, then another message. I mean it, Ethan. If I see you've logged into the system, I'm changing all your passwords. Despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the grief and the terrible revelation about Ashford's connection to Grace's company, Ethan felt his mouth twitch towards something that might have been a smile. Who are you texting? Lily asked, craning her neck to see the screen. My boss. The lady I told you about who's helping us. Is she nice? Ethan thought about Grace Thornton catching him when he fell, about her voice going soft when she asked about Lily, about the way she'd said, "Then we make them care," with the conviction of someone who meant it. Yeah, I think she is. Good. You need more nice people in your life. Mrs. Patterson says everybody needs at least 3 nice people or they get sad and lonely. Mrs. Patterson says a lot of things. She's smart, and she's right. Lily poked him in the ribs. You're sad and lonely. I can tell. I have you. I'm your daughter. That doesn't count. You need grown-up friends. Christ, when had his 7-year-old become his therapist? I'll work on it. Starting with the nice boss lady. Maybe. Lily nodded, satisfied. Okay, I'm hungry. Can we have spaghetti? Relief flooded through Ethan at the shift to normal childhood concerns. Spaghetti he could do. Spaghetti didn't require thinking about dead wives or chemical exposure or billionaire board members. Sure, baby, extra cheese, always. They ate dinner at the tiny table in the kitchen that barely qualified as a kitchen, more of an alcove with appliances crammed against walls that had seen better decades. Lily chattered about school, about the science project on ecosystems, about how Tommy Morrison's dad was building an elaborate rainforest diorama that made everyone else's projects look pathetic. Mrs. Patterson says it's not about who has the fanciest project, it's about who understands the concepts. Mrs. Patterson's right. But I still want mine to be good. Can we go to the craft store this weekend? I need better materials for my desert habitat. Ethan did the math in his head. Craft supplies, maybe $30. Rent due in 5 days, currently $247 in the bank account. Grace had said 3 days paid leave, which meant his next paycheck would cover rent barely, but that was assuming he still had a job on Thursday. We'll see, sweetheart. Lily's face fell, and Ethan hated himself for putting that expression there, hated the poverty that made a trip to the craft store something requiring calculation and stress. Another text buzzed through. Grace again. I'm serious about the rest. Doctor's orders, CEO's orders. Whatever works. Sleep tonight. That's not a suggestion. He showed Lily the screen. See, the nice boss lady is bossy. That's probably why she's the boss. Lily took his phone, typed something, and hit send before Ethan could stop her. What did you... His phone buzzed with Grace's reply. Tell Lily I said hello and I hope she's having a good evening. And tell your father he's supposed to be resting, not texting. Lily grinned triumphant. See? She's nice and bossy. That's a good combination. Ethan surrendered. Some battles weren't worth fighting. They spent the evening doing normal things, the kind of mundane rituals that had kept them both afloat for 4 years. Homework at the kitchen table. Lily's math problems spread across the scarred surface while Ethan helped with fractions and tried not to think about chemical formulas or ventilation specifications. Bath time with too much bubble soap and Lily's running commentary on every thought that crossed her mind. Story time in bed. Lily picking the same book she'd picked for the last 2 weeks, some fantasy about dragons and brave girls. "Daddy." Lily's voice came soft in the darkness after he'd turned off the light. "Yeah, baby. If you help the other kids not lose their parents, does that mean you might get in trouble with the bad people?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Ethan thought about Ashford Chemicals lawyers, about 40% voting shares, about the kind of power that bought silence and settled lawsuits and kept facilities running despite knowing people were dying. "Maybe, but that's not going to stop me. Mrs. Patterson says brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared." Ethan heard his own words from earlier echoed back at him through his daughter's voice. "Mrs. Patterson's smart. Are you scared?" He could lie, should lie. Protect her from the knowledge that yes, he was terrified that taking on a billionaire with connections and lawyers and 40% of a board felt like standing in front of a freight train and expecting to win. But Lily had asked for truth, not comfort. "Yeah, I'm scared." "That's okay. Brave people are scared too. That's what makes them brave." Ethan leaned down, kissed her forehead. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You're just noticing now." Lily's voice already sounded sleepy. "Love you, Daddy." "Love you too, baby, more than anything." He waited until her breathing evened out, until he was sure she'd drifted into whatever dreams 7-year-olds had then crept out to the living room. The apartment felt too quiet without Lily's voice filling it. Ethan stood at the window looking out at the street below where streetlights cast orange pools on cracked pavement and the corner bodega's neon sign buzzed its eternal advertisement. His phone buzzed one more time. "Grace, I've been thinking about what you told me today, about the 247 cases. I want you to know I'm taking this seriously. We're not just talking about an acquisition anymore. This is about justice. See you Thursday." "Sleep well." Ethan typed back before he could second-guess it. "Thank you for catching me today. Not just physically, for everything after." Her response came fast. "You caught yourself. You've been catching yourself for 4 years. I just made sure you didn't hit the ground this time. Now stop texting and sleep. That's an order." This time the almost smile made it all the way to actual smile. Ethan set his phone down and did something he hadn't done in 4 years, 2 months and 17 days. He slept through the night without nightmares, without waking every 2 hours to check on Lily, without the crushing weight of tomorrow's survival calculations pressing down on his chest. 8 hours of darkness and silence, and the closest thing to peace he'd felt since Rebecca's last breath rattled out in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. When he woke at 7 a.m. with sunlight streaming through the window and Lily singing off-key in the bathroom, Ethan Graves felt something dangerous and fragile and utterly terrifying bloom in his chest. Hope. Thursday morning arrived with the weight of reckoning. Ethan stood outside Thornton Industries at 8:45, coffee going cold in his hand, staring up at the glass tower that had consumed and then somehow saved him 3 days ago. The city moved around him with the indifferent efficiency of Philadelphia at rush-hour suits and briefcases, and the determined faces of people who knew exactly where they belonged in the machinery of commerce. He didn't belong here. Not anymore. Maybe never had. The lobby security waved him through with barely a glance, the same disinterested acknowledgement they'd given him for 6 months. Nothing had changed in their world. Everything had changed in his. The elevator ride to 42 stretched interminable. Ethan caught his reflection in the polished steel doors and barely recognized the man staring back. 3 nights of actual sleep had done something to his face, smoothed out lines he hadn't realized had carved themselves permanent, brought color back to skin that had gone gray with exhaustion. He looked younger. He looked dangerous. Grace's assistant waved him past without the usual screening process. Her office door stood open, an invitation or a trap depending on how you looked at it. Grace sat behind her desk reviewing something on her tablet dressed in navy that made her look like she was preparing for war. She glanced up as he entered and something in her expression shifted from CEO to something more complicated. "Close the door." Ethan obeyed, heard the lock click with a finality that suggested this conversation wouldn't be interrupted. "You look better. 8 hours a night will do that." "Sit." Grace gestured to the chair across from her desk. "We have a lot to cover and not much time. Ashford's expecting my decision on the acquisition by end of business Friday. That gives us 36 hours. Ethan sat, felt the leather embrace him with the kind of expensive comfort he'd stopped noticing after Rebecca died, when everything had narrowed down to survival metrics and bill-paying calculations. "I spent the last 3 days going through every file my father left about Ashford Chemical." Grace's fingers drummed against the tablet, restless energy barely contained. "Medical supplies is just the public face. Ashford runs 17 facilities across 6 states. Industrial solvents, cleaning products, medical equipment, sterilization chemicals. TCE is in everything, and the ventilation systems in 12 of those facilities are documented as substandard." The engineering part of Ethan's brain sparked to life, neurons firing along pathways he'd thought dead. "Substandard how?" "Air exchanges per hour below OSHA requirements. Filtration systems that haven't been upgraded since the 90s. Exposure levels that exceed permissible limits by factors of 3 to 5. Grace slid the tablet across the desk. "Your wife worked at the Newark facility, but there are 11 others just like it." Ethan scrolled through the documents, his eyes catching on numbers that should have triggered red flags, should have shut down operations, should have saved Rebecca and 246 other people whose names appeared in settlement lists and death certificates. "These reports are dated." His voice came out flat, engineer precise. "This one from 2018 explicitly recommends facility closure for remediation. The response memo says, 'Closure not economically viable, implement administrative controls instead.'" Administrative controls meaning what? Meaning they told workers to wear masks and limited shift lengths instead of fixing the actual problem. It's cheaper to rotate through employees than upgrade ventilation. The tablet screen blurred in Ethan's grip. Rebecca worked 10-hour shifts. She needed the overtime to save for— He stopped, couldn't finish. "For our daughter's future. For Lily's college fund. For everything that never happened because Rebecca's lungs filled with cancer instead." Grace's hand reached across the desk, covered his. The contact lasted 3 seconds, warm and solid and completely inappropriate for a CEO and employee. Then she withdrew. "I need to know everything you remember about your lawsuit. Every document you signed, every lawyer you spoke with, every word they used when they made you settle." The memories came back sharp as broken glass. Ethan closed his eyes and let himself fall into that particular circle of hell. November 2020. Rebecca had been dead 4 months. Lily was 3 and kept asking when Mommy was coming home from the hospital. I'd burned through our savings on medical bills. Lost my job at Harrison and Associates because I couldn't look at structural plans without seeing the building, couldn't sign off on anything without thinking about all the times I'd signed off on things that killed people. Grace went very still. "What building?" "The one that collapsed. Meadowbrook Apartments, 2019. Ethan opened his eyes, met hers. "I was the structural engineer on the original inspection, 15 years ago when they converted the warehouse to residential. I signed off on the load-bearing capacity, certified it safe for occupancy. But it wasn't. The calculations were sound, the materials met specs, everything should have held." His hands clenched into fists. "Except the owner cut corners during actual construction, substituted rebar, used substandard concrete, forged my signature on revised inspection reports. 47 people died when the 3rd floor pancaked during a wedding reception." Grace's face had gone pale. "You weren't responsible." "I signed my name. I certified safety. 47 people trusted that certification and died because someone forged documents and I wasn't watching close enough to catch it." The words tasted like poison. "So when Rebecca got sick, when the lawyers from Ashford came with settlement papers and $50,000 and promises that this was standard procedure, I signed. I signed because I believed I didn't deserve to fight. I'd already failed everyone else. Why not fail Rebecca too? The silence that followed felt like standing in a tomb. Grace stood, moved to the window, her back to him in the same position she'd taken 3 days ago. My father knew about Meadowbrook. Ethan's world tilted sideways. What? I found his files last night. He had investigators compile background on every employee who ever worked structural engineering in Philadelphia. Your name was flagged. The collapse, the lawsuits, your wife's death, everything. She turned, and her expression held something that looked like grief. He knew you were vulnerable, knew you'd be cheap to hire and unlikely to push back on anything questionable because you blamed yourself for Meadowbrook. He specifically recruited you for that reason. The words landed like punches. Ethan heard himself laugh, a sound with no humor in it. So I was hired to be compliant, a broken engineer who'd sign off on anything without asking questions. Yes. The honesty gutted him worse than a lie would have. And the acquisition, the environmental assessment I was presenting when I collapsed. Ashford Medical Supplies uses the same ventilation systems as the Newark facility where Rebecca worked. You were brought in to certify it safe, to give my board the cover they needed to approve the purchase. Grace's jaw tightened. My father's been dead 3 years. I've been running this company trying to undo his damage, and I almost bought a factory that would have killed more people because I trusted the process he put in place. Ethan stood, walked to the window beside her. Philadelphia spread out below them, a city built on foundations both literal and metaphorical, some solid and some rotten. What do? We stop the acquisition. I inform the board tomorrow that due diligence has revealed environmental concerns that make the purchase untenable. Ashford won't accept that. Ashford doesn't have a choice. He owns 40% of voting shares, through proxies, and I own 51% directly. Grace met his eyes. He can fight me. He'll lose. The certainty in her voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, wind pushing from behind. You're underestimating him. No. I'm done being careful with men who kill people for profit. She pulled out her phone, showed him a contact. I spent yesterday with lawyers, real ones, not the ones my father kept on retainer. We're filing a formal complaint with the EPA, full inspection of all 17 facilities, criminal referral to the Department of Justice. Ethan stared at the phone screen, at the gravity of what she was suggesting. That'll destroy your company. The publicity alone will cost us contracts, stock price, reputation. Grace's voice went hard as steel. I don't care. Some things matter more than profit margins. Your board will force you out. Probably. I'm prepared for that. She locked the phone, slid it back in her pocket. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes next. Because Ashford's not going to let this go quietly, and you're the key witness. Your lawsuit, your NDA, your engineering expertise on both Meadowbrook and the current facilities. Without you, this is just accusations. I signed an NDA. NDAs don't cover criminal activity. If we can prove Ashford knew about the contamination and covered it up, the NDA is void. Grace paused. But breaking it means exposing everything. Meadowbrook, Rebecca. Your part in both. The lawyers will make you look complicit. Ashford's legal team will destroy your credibility. And Lily will have a father who stood up when it mattered. Grace's expression softened. Or who didn't. That's your choice. I can't make it for you. Ethan thought about his daughter asleep in bed 3 nights ago, about her voice asking if the bad people knew what they'd done, about her wisdom. That brave meant scared and doing it anyway. What do you need from me? Relief flashed across Grace's face, gone so fast he might have imagined it. Everything. Every document you signed, every conversation you remember, every technical detail about ventilation systems and exposure levels and engineering standards. I need you to walk me through exactly what your wife experienced, what you saw in the Newark facility, what you certified in Meadowbrook. She checked her watch. We have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to build an airtight case. Ashford's expecting my decision then. Instead, he's getting federal investigators. He'll know it was us. Good. Let him know. Grace's smile held no warmth. I want him to understand exactly who ended him. They spent the next 6 hours buried in documents. Grace's office transformed into war room tablet and laptop screens glowing with evidence that sprawled across decades. Ethan's engineering expertise proved invaluable translating technical specifications into plain language that lawyers and investigators could weaponize. Ventilation rates, air quality measurements, chemical exposure thresholds, the kind of numbers that looked innocuous on paper but represented death sentences when you understood what they actually meant. Around 2 p.m., Grace ordered food delivered. They ate sandwiches, standing at the window, neither wanting to lose momentum. "Tell me about Newark." Grace's voice stayed gentle, but the request landed heavy. Ethan set down his sandwich, no longer hungry. Rebecca started working there in 2017, lab technician processing chemical samples. The pay was decent, benefits were good, she liked her coworkers. 6 months in, she mentioned headaches, nausea. Thought it was stress or maybe pregnancy again. We'd been talking about giving Lily a sibling. His throat closed. By month 9, the headaches were constant. Month 12, she was coughing blood. 18 months after her first day, doctors found tumors in both lungs. Grace's hand found his arm, steadied him. Did she connect it to work? Not at first, but other techs were getting sick. 3 women in her department developed respiratory issues within 2 years. 1 died before Rebecca. The others settled after. Ethan forced himself to continue. The company doctor said it was coincidence, genetic predisposition, lifestyle factors. Rebecca never smoked, exercised regularly, had no family history of cancer. None of it made sense until after she died and the lawyers explained about TCE. Trichloroethylene, industrial solvent, known carcinogen. Grace's voice had gone clinical, the only way to discuss horror without breaking. Long-term exposure causes liver damage, kidney failure, neurological impairment, and lung cancer. OSHA permissible exposure limit is 100 parts per million, averaged over 8 hours. What were the levels at Newark? The settlement documents listed exposure at 350 parts per million during Rebecca's shifts, some days higher. Ethan pulled out his phone, showed her photos he'd kept buried in a folder he never opened. Rebecca in her lab coat, smiling alive. Rebecca in the hospital bed, oxygen mask obscuring her face. Rebecca's grave, fresh dirt, and Lily's small hand placing flowers. They knew. The facility managers knew. They had air quality reports showing dangerous levels, and they kept running shifts anyway. Grace took the phone, studied each photo with the focus she brought to financial reports. "May I send these to our legal team?" The question acknowledged what the photos represented: the intimacy of grief, the violation of turning personal tragedy into evidence. "Do whatever helps." She forwarded the images, then returned the phone with care that felt like handling something sacred. "I'm sorry this happened to your family." "Sorry doesn't fix it." "No. But justice might." Before Ethan could respond, Grace's office phone buzzed. Her assistant's voice came through, crisp with tension. "Ms. Thornton, Malcolm Ashford is here. He says it's urgent." Grace and Ethan locked eyes. Neither had expected this, the enemy walking into headquarters unannounced. "Send him in." Ethan moved to leave, but Grace shook her head. "Stay. He needs to see you." The door opened and Malcolm Ashford entered with the confidence of a man who'd spent 6 decades winning every fight that mattered. 67 years old, silver hair, immaculate suit that cost more than Ethan's annual rent, face that looked like it had been carved from stone and smoothed by expensive living. He stopped when he saw Ethan, something flickering across his expression, too fast to identify. "Grace, I didn't realize you had company." "Malcolm, this is Ethan Graves, our senior environmental consultant." "We've met, indirectly." Ashford's eyes stayed on Ethan with the calculation of a predator assessing prey. "Your wife worked for me, Rebecca Graves. Tragic loss. You have my condolences." The casual delivery, the practiced sympathy, the way he said it like mentioning an unfortunate weather pattern, made Ethan's hands clench into fists. "Your condolences and $50,000. Very generous." Ashford's smile never reached his eyes. Standard settlement for a regrettable situation. No one could have predicted her illness. Except the air quality reports did predict it. 350 parts per million TCE exposure. OSHA limit is 100. Ethan heard his voice go flat, engineer precise, the tone he used when emotions would compromise accuracy. You knew the ventilation was inadequate. You knew employees were being exposed to carcinogenic levels. You chose profit over safety. Those are serious allegations, Mr. Graves. Fortunately, you signed an agreement not to make them. NDAs don't cover criminal negligence. Ashford's expression hardened, the mask of sympathy cracking to reveal something colder underneath. Grace, may we speak privately? No. She moved beside Ethan, a deliberate positioning that made her allegiance clear. Whatever you came to say it. Very well. Ashford pulled an envelope from his jacket, placed it on Grace's desk. I'm here to formally withdraw my support for your leadership. Effective immediately, I'm calling for an emergency board meeting to vote on your removal as CEO. The words landed like grenades. Grace's face showed nothing perfect corporate composure. On what grounds? Gross mismanagement. Specifically, your decision to halt the medical supplies acquisition based on spurious environmental concerns. That facility represents $12 million in annual revenue. Walking away from it demonstrates either incompetence or bias. Ashford's gaze slid to Ethan. I suspect the latter. You're letting personal involvement with an employee cloud your business judgment. My judgment is based on data. Your judgment is based on emotion. This man's wife died in an unfortunate accident. That doesn't give him the right to sabotage a profitable acquisition with conspiracy theories about chemical exposure. Ethan stepped forward, something in him snapping like overstressed cable. 247 people died. Rebecca wasn't an accident. She was a consequence of decisions you made consciously and repeatedly. Prove it. Ashford's voice went silk smooth, the challenge delivered with the confidence of someone who'd buried evidence for decades. Prove I knew anything beyond what my facility managers reported. Prove the exposure levels were my responsibility and not the result of employee error or equipment malfunction. Prove any of your allegations in a court of law. He paused. Oh, wait. You can't. Because you signed an NDA, which is void if we demonstrate criminal activity. Good luck with that. I have lawyers who eat conspiracy theorists for breakfast. I have politicians who owe me favors. I have a reputation built over 40 years that says I'm a job creator and philanthropist, not a murderer. Ashford turned back to Grace. You're making a mistake. A career-ending mistake. Walk away from this crusade. Approve the acquisition. Let sleeping dogs lie. Grace's laugh came cold and sharp. Or what, you'll remove me as CEO? The board doesn't have the votes. They will after I show them evidence of your inappropriate relationship with an employee, after I demonstrate how you've restructured his workload, given him special access, allowed personal feelings to compromise professional judgment. Ashford pulled out his phone, showed them photos. Grace and Ethan at the window yesterday. Grace's hand on his arm. Angles that suggested intimacy where there was only alliance. Corporate espionage is so easy these days. Your assistant was very helpful once I explained the situation. Ethan felt rage flood his system, hot and clean and clarifying. You're blackmailing her. I'm protecting my investment. Grace's father and I built this company together. I won't let his daughter destroy it because she's sleeping with a disgruntled former employee. Ashford pocketed the phone. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow. Approve the acquisition and this goes away. Reject it and I burn both your careers to ash. He left without waiting for response, the door closing behind him with a soft click that felt louder than slamming. Ethan turned to Grace, saw her standing rigid with fury barely contained. He has photos. Fabricated context. Her voice shook. We've done nothing inappropriate. Doesn't matter. He'll spin it however he wants. So we go public first. We release everything to the EPA and DOJ before the board meeting. We control the narrative. And if that doesn't work, if his lawyers bury the evidence and the board votes you out anyway. Ethan grabbed her shoulders, forced her to meet his eyes. You're risking everything. Your company, your reputation, your future. For what? For me. For Rebecca. For 200 people you never met. Grace's hands came up, covered his where they gripped her shoulders. For the truth. For justice. For the principle that some things matter more than profit. Her eyes held his with fierce intensity. Your wife deserved better. Those 200 families deserved better. Every person working in Ashford's facilities right now deserves better. And if exposing that costs me everything, then everything wasn't worth having. The certainty in her voice, the absolute conviction, cracked something open in Ethan's chest. 4 years of grief and guilt and survival mode. 4 years of believing he didn't deserve to fight because he'd already failed everyone who mattered, suddenly felt like prison walls he could finally see past. We need more than EPA complaints. We need evidence that proves knowledge and intent. We need documents showing Ashford personally knew about the exposure levels and chose not to fix them. Where do we find that? Ethan thought about engineering reports, about paper trails, about the way corporations buried evidence in plain sight under layers of bureaucratic language. Newark facility. If Rebecca's exposure was documented, there have to be internal memos, safety reports, communications between facility managers and corporate, something that shows the chain of knowledge going all the way to Ashford. Those files would be locked in facility archives. We can't access them without cause. No, but I can. Ethan pulled out his phone, showed her his old employee badge from Ashford Chemical, the one he'd kept because throwing it away felt like erasing the last proof Rebecca had existed. I was listed as next of kin on Rebecca's employment file. That gave me access rights for her personal effects and medical records. Technically, those rights don't expire. Grace stared at the badge at the photo of Ethan from 5 years ago when he'd still been whole before Meadowbrook and Rebecca's death had carved him hollow. That's a long shot. It's the only shot we have. If you get caught, then I get caught. But at least I'll have tried. Ethan pocketed the badge. Newark's 90 minutes away. If I leave now, I can be there by closing access the archives and be back before midnight. I'm coming with you. No, you stay here. Work with the lawyers. Build the case from this end. If I find smoking gun documents, you need to be ready to file immediately. Grace looked like she wanted to argue, wanted to insist, wanted to maintain control the way CEOs did. Instead, she nodded. Be careful. Ashford knows we're coming for him now. He'll be watching. Good. Let him watch. Ethan headed for the door, paused with his hand on the knob. Grace, thank you for believing me, for caring, for... Don't. Her voice cracked. Don't thank me yet. Not until we've won. The drive to Newark passed in a blur of industrial highways and gathering darkness. Ethan's hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckle intensity, his mind cycling through scenarios and contingencies and the growing certainty that this was either the bravest or stupidest thing he'd ever done. Ashford Chemical Newark sat in an industrial park that had seen better decades, surrounded by chain-link fence and security lights that cast sickly yellow pools across cracked pavement. The building itself looked like every factory Ethan had ever inspected, concrete and steel and windows too small for proper ventilation architecture that prioritized function over human comfort. Rebecca had died here. Not literally, not in the building itself, but this is where her death sentence had been written in parts per million and insufficient air exchanges. The security guard at the gate barely glanced at Ethan's old badge, waved him through with the boredom of someone working graveyard shift at a chemical facility. The parking lot held maybe a dozen cars, skeleton crew keeping operations running through the night. Ethan, parked near the administrative building, sat for a moment gathering courage. His phone buzzed. Grace, any luck? Not yet, just arrived. We'll update when I know more. Her response came immediate. I'm here if you need me. For anything. The words settled warm in his chest anchor against the fear trying to drag him under. The building's interior smelled like industrial cleaner, failing to mask chemical undertones, that particular scent of places where toxicity had soaked into walls and floors beyond any cleaning product's ability to eradicate. Ethan followed half-remembered directions to the archives. A windowless room in the basement where personnel files and safety reports went to die in filing cabinets and cardboard boxes. The door was locked. Of course it was locked. Ethan pulled out his badge, swiped it across the reader, and watched the light flash red. Access denied. 4 years had apparently been long enough for the system to purge his credentials. He stood in the fluorescent-lit hallway, staring at the locked door that held the evidence that could save Grace's case or condemn them both to failure, and felt rage build in his chest like pressure in a sealed vessel. Rebecca had walked these halls, had breathed this air, had trusted that the people running this facility cared about human life more than profit margins. She'd been wrong. They'd all been wrong. Ethan slammed his fist into the door, then again, then a third time, until his knuckles split and bled, and the pain felt like something real in a world gone abstract with injustice. "Sir, you can't be here." He turned to find a young woman in lab coat and safety goggles, maybe 25, holding a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone who'd walked into a situation they weren't trained for. "I'm looking for personnel archives. My wife worked here, Rebecca Graves. She died from TCE exposure in 2020. The woman's face shifted recognition and something that looked like guilt. "I know. I heard about it. I'm sorry." "Were you working here then?" "I started in 2019. Rebecca trained me my first week." Her voice went quiet. She was kind, patient. She talked about her daughter all the time. Ethan's throat closed around words that wouldn't come. The woman glanced down the hallway, checking for witnesses, then pulled a keycard from her pocket. "The archives are locked for good reason. Corporate doesn't want people digging through old safety reports, but—" She swiped her card, and the light flashed green. "You didn't get this access from me, and you have maybe 15 minutes before security rotates through this floor." "Why are you helping me?" "Because 3 more techs have gotten sick since Rebecca died. Same symptoms, same cancer. And every time someone complains about headaches or nausea, management says it's stress or personal health issues." She met his eyes. "I'm scared I'm next. So if you're here to do something about it, then you need to do it fast." She left before Ethan could respond, footsteps echoing down the corridor. He entered the archives and started searching. Files upon files organized with bureaucratic precision that made finding anything specific nearly impossible. Ethan pulled boxes at random, scanning labels and dates, looking for anything from 2017 to 2020. Anything with Rebecca's name or TCE exposure reports. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. 12 minutes. A box labeled Personnel Medical, 2019. Inside, dozens of incident reports. Workers complaining about headaches, dizziness, respiratory distress. Each stamped with the same response referred to company physician. No facility action required. 14 minutes. Another box, this one marked environmental compliance. Air quality reports dating back a decade. Ethan flipped through pages, his engineer's eye catching the numbers that mattered. TCE levels consistently 3 to 4 times OSHA limits. Recommendations for ventilation upgrades, and then stapled to a report from 2018, a memo on corporate letterhead. From Malcolm Ashford, CEO, to Newark Facility Management, re-proposed ventilation upgrades. The recommended system improvements would cost approximately $2.3 million and require facility shutdown for 6 weeks during installation. This is not economically viable given current profit margins. Implement administrative controls instead. Limit shift lengths, require PPE rotate workers to minimize individual exposure. Continue monitoring and report any serious incidents requiring settlement. Ethan read it twice, 3 times, the words burning themselves into his memory. Continue monitoring and report any serious incidents requiring settlement. Ashford hadn't just known. He'd planned for deaths. Had budgeted for them. Settlements were cheaper than safety. His phone buzzed. Grace. Status. It's been 20 minutes. Found it. Memo from Ashford himself. Smoking gun. He photographed the memo, the air quality reports, the medical incident files, everything that proved knowledge and intent and willful negligence. The camera flash seemed too bright in the dim archives, each click feeling like a countdown. Send me the photos now. in case something happens. Ethan hit send, watched the files upload, then grabbed the physical documents. Maybe redundant, maybe paranoid, but he wasn't taking chances. Footsteps in the hallway. Heavy. Security. Ethan shoved the papers inside his jacket, killed the lights in the archives and moved to the door, pressed his ear against it and heard voices approaching. Motion sensor triggered in the basement. Probably nothing, but we should check. Third time this week. System's glitchy. The voices moved past, continued down the hallway. Ethan waited 30 seconds that felt like 30 hours, then slipped out and moved in the opposite direction. Took stairs instead of elevator, emerged into the parking lot, walked to his car with forced casualness while every nerve screamed run. The drive back to Philadelphia passed in a fugue state, adrenaline and triumph, and the growing weight of what he'd just done. Breaking and entering technically. Theft of corporate documents, enough to get him arrested if Ashford wanted to press charges. He texted Grace from the highway. "On my way back. We have what we need." Her response came with a phone number attached. "My address. Come here. Don't go home. Ashford's people are watching your apartment." Ethan's blood went cold. "Lily's safe. I sent security to get her from school. She's with me. Don't worry. Just get here." The knowledge that his daughter was safe, that Grace had anticipated the threat and moved first, released something in Ethan's chest he hadn't known was locked tight. He pressed harder on the accelerator, watching the speedometer climb past limits that suddenly felt irrelevant. Grace's building occupied prime real estate in Center City, the kind of address that required doormen and key cards, and the implicit understanding that people who lived here didn't worry about money. The lobby gleamed marble and brass architecture that promised security and discretion in equal measure. The elevator to the penthouse required Grace's personal code, which she'd texted him. Ethan rode up 48 floors higher than he'd ever been in his life and felt like he was ascending towards something that couldn't be real. The doors opened directly into her apartment. Grace stood waiting still in her navy suit, but with her hair down now, looking less like a CEO and more like a woman who'd been pacing and worrying and waiting for news. "You got it." Ethan pulled out the documents, laid them on her dining table like evidence at a crime scene. Memo from Ashford himself. Dated 2018, 2 years before Rebecca died. He knew the exposure levels. He knew workers were getting sick. He chose settlements over safety. Grace read the memo, her expression going hard with vindication and rage. "This is it. This is what we need." "Where's Lily?" "Guest room. Asleep. She was scared when security came for her, but I explained you were doing something important and she'd be safer here." Grace met his eyes. "She's worried about you. Wants to make sure the bad people don't hurt you. I need to see her. Go. I'll call the lawyers." Ethan found Lily curled in a bed that could have swallowed her 3 times over her stuffed elephant clutched tight, her face peaceful in sleep. He sat on the edge of the mattress, brushed hair from her forehead, and felt tears he'd been holding back for 4 years finally break free. "Daddy," Lily's eyes opened, still half dreaming. "I'm here, baby. You're safe." "Did you get the bad people?" "Working on it." "Good." She reached for his hand. "Miss Grace is nice. She said we could stay here as long as we need. She has a telescope. She promised to show me stars tomorrow." "That sounds perfect." "I like her, Daddy. She makes you smile. Even when you're scared, you smile when you talk about her." Lily's eyes drifted closed again. "Mrs. Patterson says people who make us smile are people we should keep." Ethan kissed her forehead, whispered promises he intended to keep, and left her to dreams that hopefully contained stars and telescopes instead of chemical exposure and dead mothers. Grace stood at the window when he returned, phone pressed to her ear, conducting legal strategy with the clipped precision of someone declaring war. She glanced up as he entered, pointed to the couch in silent invitation. Ethan collapsed into leather that felt like clouds, exhaustion hitting now that adrenaline had burned through. He watched Grace command her legal team, watched her transform from the woman who'd caught him when he fell into the CEO who could dismantle empires, and felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with justice or revenge. She ended the call, turned to face him. "Legal's drafting the criminal referral now. We file with DOJ first thing tomorrow. EPA follows." By noon, Ashford's facilities will have federal investigators crawling through every file and air duct. And the board meeting, scheduled for 3 p.m. Ashford thinks he's removing me. Instead, he's walking into a public expose with federal charges pending. Grace smiled sharp and satisfied. I've also called an emergency press conference for noon. We're releasing everything. The memo, the air quality reports, the settlement lists all of it. Your company will survive or it won't, but it won't survive built on blood money and covered-up negligence. She moved to sit beside him close enough that he could feel her warmth. I've made my choice. The question is whether you've made yours. Ethan turned to face her, saw the question in her eyes that had nothing to do with corporate strategy. What choice? After tomorrow, after we've exposed Ashford and the lawsuits start and the media descends, your life won't ever be private again. Rebecca's death will be dissected. Meadowbrook will be examined. Every failure, every mistake, every moment of grief will become public record. Grace's voice went soft. You can still walk away. Take Lily somewhere safe. Let me fight this battle alone. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. What's best for you and Lily matters. Ethan thought about his daughter asleep in the next room, about Rebecca buried in a grave that shouldn't exist, about 246 other families destroyed by decisions made in boardrooms they'd never see. Lily asked me once if the bad people knew what they did. I told her yes. But the truth is, they didn't care. They knew, and they chose profit anyway. And if we walk away now, they'll keep choosing profit. More Rebeccas will die. More families will sign NDAs and bury their grief for $50,000. He met Grace's eyes. So no, I'm not walking away, because someone has to make them care. Even if it costs you everything. I already lost everything 4 years ago. This is about making that loss mean something. Grace's hand found his fingers intertwining with the certainty of a promise being made. Then we end him together. They sat in silence while the city glittered below two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of catastrophe, building something from truth and rage and the stubborn refusal to let evil win simply because fighting was hard. Ethan's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Back off or your daughter becomes another casualty. Consider this your only warning. He showed Grace the text, watched her face go cold with fury that matched his own. He threatened Lily. Which means he's scared. Good. Grace stood, moved to her desk, pulled out something Ethan couldn't see. I've been CEO long enough to know how men like Ashford operate. They threaten what you love because they assume fear will stop you. She returned carrying a tablet, showed him security feeds. These cameras cover every entrance to this building. Private security on every floor. Lily's safer here than anywhere else in the city. Until we're not here. Until we have to leave and face whatever Ashford has planned. Then we make our move first. We strike tomorrow before he can regroup. Grace's eyes blazed with determination. No more waiting, no more careful planning. We burn his empire down and dare him to come after us through the ashes. Ethan stood, faced her across 3 feet of expensive carpet and the vast distance between their worlds. Why are you doing this? Really? It's not just about the acquisition or your father's legacy or even justice. Why risk everything for people you never met? Grace was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of truth too painful to examine in daylight. Because 16 years ago I had a daughter, Emily. She was 8 years old, brilliant and brave and everything good in my life. Tears tracked down her face, the first emotion beyond rage Ethan had seen crack through her control. She died in Meadowbrook. The wedding reception was my cousin's. Emily was flower girl. When the building collapsed, she was on the 3rd floor. The world stopped. Ethan's vision narrowed to Grace's face, to the tears and the truth and the impossible connection. Oh my God. I've spent 16 years blaming myself. If I hadn't let her go. If I'd been there instead of working late. If I'd checked the building inspection reports myself. Grace's voice broke. Then 3 days ago you collapsed in my conference room and told me about Rebecca and Lily. and I realized we'd both lost everything to other people's negligence. Both signed NDAs, both buried our grief, both pretended we could survive alone. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. If I'd known Emily was... You would have what blamed yourself more, carried more guilt. Grace shook her head. We've both carried enough. It's time someone else carried the consequences of their choices. Ethan crossed the distance between them, pulled her into his arms, felt her shake with sobs she'd probably been holding back for 16 years. They stood there in her penthouse overlooking a city that had taken their families and tried to take their futures and somehow found strength in shared devastation. We end him. Ethan's voice came out fierce. For Emily, for Rebecca, for every person who trusted safety regulations and building codes and employers to care about human life. Together. Together. They pulled apart, wiped tears, and got back to work. The night passed in a blur of legal documents and strategic planning and coffee that tasted like determination. Lily woke once around 3 a.m. and found them still at the dining table surrounded by evidence. Grace made her hot chocolate while Ethan explained in age-appropriate terms that they were making sure no other kids lost their parents the way Lily lost her mom. Are you and Miss Grace partners now? Lily asked, sipping chocolate and looking between them with the perception of someone who saw more than adults realized. We're working together, yes. Mrs. Patterson says partners help each other be brave. She says 2 brave people together can be braver than 1 brave person alone. Lily yawned. I'm glad you have Miss Grace, Daddy. You've been alone too long. She went back to bed, leaving Ethan and Grace staring at each other across the table, something unspoken building in the space between them. Dawn broke over Philadelphia with the promise of reckoning. Ethan stood at the window watching light paint the skyline gold and pink, Grace beside him, their shoulders touching. 5 hours until the press conference. Her voice held steady. 4 hours until DOJ receives our filing. 3 hours until Ashford realizes he's lost. You think it'll be that clean? No, I think it'll be bloody and brutal and harder than anything we've ever done. Grace turned to face him. But we're doing it anyway. For the people we lost. And the people we might save. Ethan's phone buzzed. His lawyer, the one handling what was left of Rebecca's estate. Mr. Graves. Important development. Ashford Chemical just filed motion to enforce your NDA. They're seeking injunction to prevent you from testifying or releasing any information about your wife's death. Court date tomorrow. Call me immediately. The words sank in like stones. Ashford wasn't just threatening, he was already moving through legal channels to silence them. Grace read over his shoulder, her expression hardening. He's faster than I expected. Can he actually enforce the NDA? Normally, maybe. But we're filing criminal referrals before his motion is heard. Once DOJ has the evidence, the NDA becomes irrelevant. She checked her watch. We need to move up our timeline. Press conference in 2 hours instead of 5. We go public before he can stop us. That's not enough time to... It's the time we have. We work with it, or we lose. For the next 90 minutes, chaos reigned in controlled bursts, lawyers arriving with documents to sign, PR team staging the conference room at Thornton Industries, security coordinating with law enforcement for crowd control, and through it all, Grace orchestrated with the precision of someone who'd spent her life managing crises, turning panic into power. Ethan called his lawyer back, explained the situation, listened to warnings about contempt of court and legal consequences that suddenly felt less important than justice. I'm testifying regardless. Let Ashford try to stop me. At 11:45, they gathered in the conference room where Ethan had collapsed 4 days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Grace stood at the podium, notes prepared, face composed into the mask of CEO delivering difficult news. Ethan sat beside her, Lily safe with security in Grace's office watching on video feed. The press filed in cameras and recorders and the hungry expressions of journalists sensing blood in the water. At exactly noon, Grace began. Just this week, one of my employees collapsed during a board meeting due to exhaustion and grief. That collapse led to a series of discoveries that have fundamentally changed my understanding of this company's history and my responsibility as CEO. She laid out the evidence with surgical precision. The memo from Ashford, the air quality reports, the settlement lists, 247 deaths, 16 facilities still operating with dangerous exposure levels, a pattern of negligence spanning 4 decades. Today, Thornton Industries is filing criminal referrals with the Department of Justice and formal complaints with the EPA regarding Ashford Chemical Corporation and its subsidiaries. We are also terminating all business relationships with Malcolm Ashford, removing him from our board, and requesting federal investigation into his facilities. The press erupted with questions. Grace answered each one with facts and numbers and the cold fury of someone who'd discovered betrayal. Then she introduced Ethan. This is Ethan Graves. His wife Rebecca died from TCE exposure while working at Ashford's Newark facility. He signed an NDA in 2020 as part of a settlement agreement. Today he's breaking that NDA to tell the truth. Ethan stood, faced the cameras, and spoke the words he'd been silenced from saying for 4 years. My wife was murdered by corporate negligence. Malcolm Ashford knew workers were being exposed to lethal levels of carcinogens. He chose settlements over safety because deaths were cheaper than ventilation upgrades. Rebecca was 33 years old. Our daughter was 3. She died because profit mattered more than human life. And if we don't stop Ashford now, more families will experience what mine did. The cameras flashed like lightning, the questions came like thunder, and somewhere across the city, Malcolm Ashford watched his empire begin to crumble. The press conference ended at 12:47. By 12:53, Ashford's lawyers had filed an emergency motion for contempt of court. By 1:15, federal marshals arrived at Thornton Industries with subpoenas for every document Grace had displayed. By 1:45, the board convened its emergency session 3 hours ahead of schedule, and Malcolm Ashford walked into that room carrying the confidence of a man who'd survived worse storms than 2 people with evidence and rage. Grace sat at the head of the table, Ethan beside her in a chair he had no official right to occupy. 15 board members arrayed themselves along the mahogany like a firing squad finding positions. Ashford took his seat with deliberate slowness, making everyone wait, making everyone understand that despite the press conference and federal subpoenas and cameras still gathered in the lobby downstairs, he remained a man with power. Grace, that was quite a performance. His voice carried the measured calm of someone delivering a eulogy. Dramatic, emotional, completely inappropriate for a CEO of a publicly traded company. The truth is never inappropriate. The truth is you just cost this company $400 million in market capitalization. Our stock dropped 16% in 90 minutes. Partners are pulling contracts. Clients are demanding explanations. Ashford leaned forward. You've destroyed shareholder value based on allegations you can't prove and vendetta against me personally. I can prove every allegation. The federal government is proving them right now at your facilities. Then you should have let the government handle it quietly. Instead, you chose spectacle. You chose to publicly accuse me of murder in front of national media. You violated every principle of corporate governance and fiduciary responsibility. He glanced around the table. I move for immediate removal of Grace Thornton as CEO effective today. Seconded. Patricia Morgan 5P of Finance didn't meet Grace's eyes. The vote happened fast, efficient, brutal. 8 hands raised in favor, 4 against, 3 abstentions. The math was simple and devastating. Motion carries. Ashford's expression remained neutral. Grace, you're relieved of all duties effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building within the hour. Any company property in your possession must be surrendered. Grace stood slowly gathering the documents she'd brought, the evidence that had just cost her everything she'd built for 16 years. You think this is over? You think removing me stops what's coming? Her voice stayed level. Federal investigators don't care who's CEO. DOJ doesn't need my cooperation to build their case. You've won this room. You've lost everything else. We'll see. The legal system favors those with resources and patience. I have both. You have neither. Ashford gestured to security waiting at the door. "Please escort Ms. Thornton and her guest from the premises." Ethan stood his hand finding Grace's elbow in silent support. They walked through the boardroom door together while 15 people who'd worked with Grace for years looked away complicit in their silence. The elevator ride down 42 floors felt like descending into a different life. Grace stared at her reflection in the polished steel, seeing a woman who'd just sacrificed her career for principles she hoped were worth the cost. "I'm sorry." Ethan's words came quiet. "This is my fault." "No. This was my choice. I knew the price going in." "You lost your company. I lost a position. The company was never really mine. It was my father's legacy built on partnerships with men like Ashford." She turned to face him. "Maybe it's better this way. Maybe I can do more good outside those walls than I ever could inside them." The lobby bustled with reporters who surged forward as Grace and Ethan emerged from the elevator. Cameras flashed. Questions came in waves. Security formed a corridor toward the exit. "Ms. Thornton, do you regret your decision? Will you appeal the board's vote? What's your relationship with Ethan Graves?" Grace stopped at the building's entrance, turned to address the assembled press with the composure of someone who had nothing left to lose and therefore everything to gain. "I regret nothing. The board removed me for exposing corporate negligence that killed hundreds of people. That says more about them than it does about me. As for Mr. Graves, he's a man who lost his wife to criminal negligence and had the courage to speak truth when everyone else chose silence. I'm honored to stand with him." She walked out into afternoon sunlight that felt too bright, too normal, too indifferent to the fact that her world had just collapsed. Ethan's phone buzzed. His lawyer. "Emergency hearing on NDA enforcement scheduled for 4 p.m. today. Judge Fast's courtroom. You need to be there." Grace read over his shoulder, checked her watch. 2 hours. We can make it." You think I'm letting you face Ashford's lawyers alone? I just lost my company defending you. The least I can do is watch you destroy his legal strategy." They retrieved Lily from Grace's office, where she'd been watching the press conference on video with wide eyes and the solemn expression of a child processing adult catastrophe. "Daddy, are you in trouble?" "Maybe, but I'm doing the right thing. Sometimes those go together." "Mrs. Patterson says trouble for doing right is different than trouble for doing wrong. The first kind you stand tall, the second kind you hide." Lily took his hand. "So stand tall." The drive to federal courthouse passed through streets that felt charged with significance. News vans already positioned outside reporters doing stand-ups about the Ashford scandal. Protesters gathering with signs demanding justice for chemical exposure victims. The story had metastasized faster than Ethan could track, spreading through social media and news cycles until it felt larger than 2 people and 1 press conference. They entered through side entrance, avoiding cameras, found the courtroom already packed. Ashford's legal team occupied the plaintiff's table, 5 lawyers in suits that cost more than Ethan's annual income. His own lawyer, Daniel Wright, sat alone at the defendant's table, looking like David preparing to face Goliath with a slingshot and hope. The bailiff called court to order. Judge Maria Fast entered, 60 years old, and carrying the reputation of someone who suffered fools poorly and corporate malfeasance not at all. "I've reviewed the emergency motion. Mr. Ashford's counsel, you claim Mr. Graves violated a binding non-disclosure agreement by speaking at today's press conference." Ashford's lead attorney stood a man named Kenneth Reeves, who specialized in making problems disappear through legal intimidation. "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Graves signed a comprehensive NDA in 2020 as part of a settlement agreement regarding his wife's death. The agreement explicitly prohibits him from making any public statements about Ashford Chemical, its facilities, or the circumstances of Rebecca Graves's employment. Today's press conference violated that agreement in spectacular fashion." "Your Honor, if I may." Daniel Wright rose, his voice steadier than his hands. "The NDA in question contains a standard exception for criminal activity. If Mr. Graves possesses evidence of crimes, he cannot be silenced from reporting those crimes. The First Amendment and public policy both support his right to speak. Alleged crimes. Reeves's correction came sharp. Mr. Graves has evidence of nothing beyond his own grief and conspiracy theories. The medical examiner ruled Rebecca Graves's death natural causes. The settlement acknowledged no wrongdoing. He's breaking a legally binding contract based on speculation. Judge Fast turned her attention to Ethan. Mr. Graves, do you have evidence of criminal activity, or are you making accusations based on suspicion? Ethan stood, felt Grace's hand touch his back briefly, then stepped forward. Your Honor, I have a memo written by Malcolm Ashford in 2018, 2 years before my wife died. The memo acknowledges that TCE exposure levels at the Newark facility exceeded OSHA limits. It acknowledges workers were getting sick. It explicitly chose settlements over safety upgrades because settlements were cheaper. That's not suspicion. That's premeditated negligence amounting to manslaughter. You stole that document from a secure facility. Reeves's voice carried triumph. Breaking and entering theft of corporate property. Your Honor, Mr. Graves is a criminal trying to use stolen evidence to justify breaking a binding agreement. I accessed files I had legal right to access as next of kin to a deceased employee. The documents were part of my wife's employment records. Employment records don't include internal corporate communications. They do when those communications directly caused an employee's death. Judge Fast raised her hand, silencing both sides. I'm ordering a recess. I need to review the actual documents Mr. Graves claims to possess. If they support his allegations, the NDA's criminal exception applies. If they don't, he's in contempt. She checked her watch. We reconvene at 5. Both parties will submit all relevant documents to my chambers within 30 minutes. The courtroom erupted into motion. Lawyers scrambling, reporters rushing to file updates, Lily tugging on Ethan's sleeve with questions he didn't have answers for. Grace pulled him aside into an empty conference room down the hall. You need to give them everything. The memo, the air quality reports, the settlement lists. All of it. That's what DOJ has. If I give it to the court, I'm duplicating evidence. Good. Multiple jurisdictions means Ashford can't bury this in one venue. Criminal court, civil court, federal investigation, all examining the same evidence from different angles. Grace's eyes blazed with strategy. He's trying to silence you before DOJ can move. If the judge rules in your favor, it establishes precedent that you can't be silenced. That opens the door for every other victim to break their NDAs. The implications hit Ethan like electricity. 200 families, all with settlements and NDAs. If I win, they can all speak. Exactly. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about whether corporate negligence can buy permanent silence. They spent the next 25 minutes in Daniel Wright's office compiling every document Ethan had photographed from the Newark archives. The memo from Ashford. Air quality reports showing chronic violations. Medical incident reports documenting worker illness. Settlement agreements with Rebecca's name alongside dozens of others. At 4:58 they returned to the courtroom. Judge Fast emerged from chambers carrying a folder thick with evidence and an expression that suggested she'd seen enough. I've reviewed the documents. The memo from Malcolm Ashford, dated October 2018, explicitly acknowledges dangerous exposure levels and consciously chooses financial settlements over safety improvements. If authenticated, this constitutes evidence of criminal negligence. She fixed Ethan with a stare that could crack stone. Mr. Graves, are you prepared to testify under oath that these documents are genuine and that you obtained them legally? Yes, Your Honor. Then I'm denying the motion to enforce the NDA. The criminal exception applies. Mr. Graves is free to speak publicly about these matters. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the U.S. Attorney for potential criminal prosecution. She turned to Reeves. Counsel, inform your client that attempting to silence whistleblowers rarely ends well, and threatening federal witnesses ends even worse. The gavel came down with finality that echoed like thunder. Ashford's lawyers gathered their materials in tight-lipped silence. Ethan felt Grace's hand find his squeeze, once then release. Daniel Wright grinned like someone who'd just won the lottery despite buying a single ticket. Outside the courthouse, the press waited like wolves scenting blood. Ethan faced the cameras with Lily on one side and Grace on the other, three people bound by loss and the stubborn refusal to let that loss be meaningless. The court ruled that my NDA doesn't apply when reporting crimes. Malcolm Ashford knew workers were dying. He knew the exposure levels were lethal. He chose profits over people, and now he'll face the consequences. For Rebecca, for Emily, for everyone who trusted their employers to value human life. The cameras captured it all, the father and daughter, the disgraced CEO standing in solidarity. The moment when silence broke and truth came flooding through. Ethan's phone exploded with calls and texts, other families from the settlement lists, journalists requesting interviews, law firms smelling class action lawsuits, the ripple effect spreading faster than he could track. One call came from a number he didn't recognize. He answered out of habit, heard a voice that made his blood run cold. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Graves." Malcolm Ashford's tone carried no anger, just the clinical precision of someone explaining mathematics. "I've spent 40 years building this company. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers who specialize in destroying people like you. Investigators who can find every mistake you've ever made, every corner you've cut, every lie you've told. Is this a threat? It's a warning. You have a daughter. Think about her future. Think about what happens when every potential employer searches your name and finds you labeled a corporate saboteur. Think about the lawsuits I can file, the legal fees that will bury you, the years of your life I can consume in depositions and motions and appeals. I'm thinking about the 247 families you destroyed. I'm thinking my daughter gets to grow up knowing her father stood up when it mattered. Noble, stupid but noble." Ashford's laugh came dry as ash. "You know what happens to noble men who fight corporations? They lose. Always. Because we have infinite resources and infinite patience, and you have neither. We'll see." "Yes, we will." The line went dead. Grace had been listening, her expression darkening with each word. "He's going to come after you with everything. Financial warfare, legal attrition, character assassination. Let him try. Ethan, you don't have the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle. He can file a dozen spurious lawsuits, force you to hire lawyers, drain your savings defending yourself. Even if you win every case, the process destroys you. Then I'll be destroyed standing up instead of destroyed staying silent." He looked at Lily, who was watching them both with the gravity of someone who understood more than adults realized. "What kind of man would I be if I gave up because fighting was hard? What would I teach her?" Lily's voice came small but certain. "You'd teach me that money matters more than people, that rich people always win, that when bad people threaten you, you hide." Her eyes met his. "Is that what you believe?" The question hit harder than anything Ashford had said. "No, baby. That's not what I believe." "Then we fight." Grace's voice carried steel wrapped in determination. "Not just you. We. I have money. I have lawyers. I have connections in media and politics." Ashford thought removing me from Thornton would silence me. He gave me freedom instead. "I can't ask you to spend your resources. You're not asking. I'm choosing." Grace turned to face him fully. "You caught me when I was falling 4 days ago in that conference room. You showed me my father's legacy was built on blood. You gave me purpose beyond corporate profits. Let me return the favor." Before Ethan could respond, 3 black SUVs pulled up to the courthouse entrance. Federal agents emerged, led by a woman in her 40s, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades taking down criminals who thought themselves untouchable. "Ethan Graves, Grace Thornton. I'm Special Agent Rebecca Santos, FBI. We need to talk about Malcolm Ashford and the evidence you provided to DOJ." They relocated to a secure conference room in the federal building 3 blocks away. Agent Santos laid out photographs on the table, faces Ethan didn't recognize, but circumstances he understood too well. "These are 17 workers who died from TCE exposure at Ashford facilities between 2010 and 2024. We've been investigating for 3 years but couldn't break through the wall of NDAs and sealed settlements. Your press conference changed that. 6 families called us within an hour of your testimony. They're willing to speak now." Grace leaned forward, studying the photographs. "How do we help?" "You already have, but Ashford's going to fight back hard. He has connections in Congress, judges who owe him favors, media outlets he can weaponize." Santos fixed them both with a stare that demanded honesty. "This investigation could take years. During that time, you'll be targets. Surveillance, harassment, legal warfare, possibly physical threats. Are you prepared for that?" Ethan thought about the phone call from Ashford about the promise of infinite resources and infinite patience deployed to destroy him. "We don't have a choice. If we stop now, he wins. More people die. The system proves that corporations can buy silence indefinitely. You do have a choice. You could disappear. Change your names, relocate. Let us handle the prosecution without you." Santos's expression softened. "I've seen what happens to whistleblowers. Even when they win, they lose. Years of their lives consumed by litigation, relationships destroyed by stress, careers ended. Some people think the cost is too high. Those people didn't watch their wives die choking on tumors that shouldn't have existed. They didn't sign NDAs because $50,000 was the difference between feeding their child and bankruptcy. They didn't spend 4 years believing they had no power to change anything." Ethan's voice went quiet. "I'm not disappearing. I'm done hiding." Santos nodded slowly, respect in her eyes. "Then we work together. I'll need detailed statements from both of you. Access to all documents. Permission to monitor your communications in case Ashford tries witness tampering." She paused. "And I'll assign protective surveillance. Someone will be watching your apartment, Ms. Thornton's residence, anywhere your daughter spends time. Ashford's desperate, and desperate men make dangerous choices." The implications settled heavy. Lily would grow up with federal agents shadowing her movements with the knowledge that her father's crusade had painted a target on their family. Grace's hand found Ethan's under the table, a anchor against doubt. "We'll do whatever's necessary." They spent the next 4 hours giving statements, walking Santos through every detail of Rebecca's death, the Newark facility, the documents Ethan had obtained the press conference that morning. By the time they finished, night had fallen over Philadelphia, and exhaustion weighted every word. Santos walked them out through a service entrance, away from cameras and protesters and the circus their lives had become. "Go home. Get sleep. Tomorrow the media storm intensifies. Ashford's PR team will start their counteroffensive trying to discredit you both. Stay off social media. Don't respond to provocations. Let your lawyers handle communication." The drive back to Grace's penthouse passed in silence. Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat, her elephant clutched tight, her face peaceful in a way that made Ethan's chest ache. How did you explain to a 7-year-old that her father had just made their lives exponentially more complicated in service of abstract concepts like justice and accountability? Grace's building offered sanctuary, at least temporarily. The doorman nodded them through with discretion that suggested he'd been briefed. The elevator ride up 48 floors felt like ascending toward a life that couldn't last a borrowed peace before the real battle began. Inside the penthouse, Lily woke enough to stumble to the guest room. Ethan tucked her in, whispered promises about keeping her safe, and returned to find Grace standing at the window overlooking the city. "You can still walk away." Her voice came quiet. "Take Lily somewhere Ashford can't reach. Let me and the FBI handle this. We've had this conversation. I know, but now it's real. Now you've seen what you're up against. Resources and patience and the willingness to destroy you inch by inch." She turned to face him. "I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm trying to make sure you understand the cost." Ethan moved to stand beside her, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight she carried from losing Emily 16 years ago and her company today. "What's the alternative? Teach Lily that justice only applies to people who can afford it. Show her that speaking truth means nothing if the lies have better lawyers." He shook his head. "Rebecca died believing the system would protect her. Emily died because building inspectors failed. How many more have to die before someone says enough? You sound like me 16 years ago. After Emily, I wanted to burn down every company, every regulator, every person who'd failed to keep her safe. Grace's expression went distant. But the system crushed me. Lawyers buried me in paperwork. I signed an NDA. I took the settlement. I went back to work and pretended I could survive by succeeding in the same structure that had killed my daughter. What changed? You collapsed in my conference room. You showed me there are still people willing to fight even when fighting seems impossible. She met his eyes. You reminded me who I used to be before grief turned me into my father. The space between them felt charged with something beyond strategy and shared purpose. Ethan saw Grace not as CEO or ally, but as a woman who'd survived catastrophe and found the courage to risk everything again. I don't know how to do this. Fight a billionaire. Protect my daughter. Navigate federal investigations and legal warfare and media scrutiny. His voice cracked. I'm terrified I'm going to fail. Again. You didn't fail Rebecca. The system failed her. I signed off on Meadowbrook. I approved those materials. Before someone forged documents and substituted substandard materials. You're not responsible for corruption you couldn't see. Grace's hands came up to frame his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. You've been carrying guilt that belongs to other people. Ashford, the facility managers who knew about exposure levels, the building owner who cut corners. Stop punishing yourself for their sins. How do I stop? You fight. Not for revenge, not for redemption, for the principle that human life matters more than profit. That's how you honor Rebecca. That's how you teach Lily what integrity looks like. The words settled into Ethan's chest like seeds finding soil. He'd spent 4 years believing he had no right to fight because he'd already failed. Grace was offering a different narrative, one where failure created obligation rather than disqualification. I'm afraid of losing everything. My daughter's safety, your resources, this alliance we've built. I'm afraid Ashford will destroy it all and prove that fighting was stupid. Fear is proof you understand the stakes. That doesn't mean you're wrong to fight. Grace's voice went soft. Sometimes the right thing costs everything. You pay anyway. That's what integrity means. Ethan pulled her close, felt her arms wrap around him with strength that belied her smaller frame. They stood there in her penthouse overlooking a city that had taken their families and their certainty and somehow found in each other the courage to face whatever came next. His phone shattered the moment, buzzing with a call from Daniel Wright. Ethan, we have a problem. Ashford just filed 3 lawsuits: defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, and theft of corporate property. Combined damages claim exceeds $15 million. The number hit like a physical blow. I don't have $15 million. I don't have $15,000. I know. That's the point. He's trying to force you into bankruptcy defending yourself. Each lawsuit requires separate legal teams' discovery depositions. Even if you win, the legal fees alone will destroy you. Wright's voice carried resignation. This is how corporations bury whistleblowers. Death by 1,000 legal cuts. Grace took the phone from Ethan's hand. Daniel, it's Grace Thornton. I'm covering all legal costs for Ethan's defense. Hire the best attorneys money can buy. File counterclaims for malicious prosecution. Make this expensive for Ashford, too. Ms. Thornton, these cases could drag on for years. Legal fees could reach 7 figures. Then they reach 7 figures. Bill me directly. She ended the call, handed the phone back to Ethan. You can't spend your money defending me. I can spend my money however I choose. And I choose to make sure Ashford learns that some people can't be bankrupted into silence. Grace's eyes blazed. He thought removing me from Thornton neutralized me. He just gave me freedom to deploy resources without board oversight. Every dollar I spend fighting him is a dollar my father earned from men like him. Poetic justice. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to insist he couldn't accept charity, wanted to protect his pride and independence. But pride didn't pay lawyers, and independence wouldn't stop Ashford from burying him in litigation. I'll pay you back. Somehow, when this is over. When this is over, we'll both have spent more than money. Don't worry about repayment. Worry about winning. The next week passed in a blur of legal motions and media interviews and the grinding machinery of federal investigation. DOJ executed search warrants at all 17 Ashford facilities, seizing documents and air quality equipment and employment records. EPA issued violations totaling $43 million in fines. OSHA opened their own inquiry. The House Oversight Committee announced hearings. Ashford fought back with the resources Grace had warned about. His PR firm launched a campaign portraying Ethan as a disgruntled employee with mental health issues, fabricating allegations for attention. They dug up every mistake from his past, broadcast his role in Meadowbrook, framed him as an engineer who'd failed, and was now projecting blame onto others. The media coverage turned brutal. Half the outlets championed Ethan as a whistleblower hero. The other half painted him as a conspiracy theorist exploiting his wife's death for a vendetta. Social media fractured along predictable lines, death threats and support flowing in equal measure. Through it all, Grace stood beside him. At depositions where Ashford's lawyers tried to break him with questions designed to humiliate. At press conferences where reporters asked if his relationship with Grace constituted conflict of interest. At hearings where politicians grandstanded about corporate responsibility while taking Ashford's campaign contributions. Lily watched it all with the gravity of someone learning that adults lied and systems failed, and doing the right thing sometimes made life harder, not easier. 2 weeks after the initial press conference, Agent Santos called with news. "We've authenticated the documents you provided. The memo from Ashford is genuine. We've also found 17 similar memos spanning 15 years, all showing knowledge of dangerous conditions and conscious choice to settle rather than remediate. Combined with victim testimony, we have enough for criminal charges. Grand jury convenes next month." The words should have brought triumph. Instead, Ethan felt only exhaustion mixed with grief that Rebecca wouldn't see this, that Emily hadn't lived long enough to know her death mattered. What happens now? Now we build an airtight case. Ashford has the best defense attorneys money can buy. We need to prove beyond reasonable doubt that he personally knew about the dangers and consciously chose profit over safety. That requires testimony from facility managers, corporate executives, anyone with direct knowledge of his decision-making. And if they won't testify? Then we find other evidence. Financial records showing cost-benefit analyses, email chains discussing settlement strategies, documentation of his personal involvement in decisions that led to deaths. Santos paused. "This is a marathon, not a sprint. Stay patient. Stay focused. Don't let Ashford provoke you into mistakes." Patience felt impossible when every day brought new attacks. Ashford's lawyers deposed everyone Ethan had ever worked with, fishing for ammunition to discredit him. They subpoenaed his financial records, medical records, anything that might reveal vulnerability. They sent investigators to interview Lily's teachers, neighbors, people from his past. Grace endured similar treatment. Her business decisions at Thornton scrutinized, her personal life examined, her relationship with Ethan framed as either romantic entanglement clouding judgment or calculated alliance between conspirators. Through it all, they maintained the fiction that they were simply allies united by shared purpose. The truth was more complicated, something neither had time or courage to examine while fighting for survival. One night, 3 weeks after the press conference, Ethan found Grace on her balcony at midnight, staring at the city with an expression that looked like someone calculating costs. "Can't sleep. Thinking about Emily. She'd be 24 now. College graduate probably. Starting a career. Maybe married." Grace's voice carried the hollow quality of old grief reopened. "I spent 16 years not thinking about her future because it hurt too much. Now I can't stop." Ethan leaned against the railing beside her. "Rebecca would be 37. Lily would have a mother. I'd have a wife who knew me before grief carved out everything soft and left only sharp edges." He paused. "I don't know if we're honoring them or using them as excuses to justify rage. Does it matter? Either way, we're trying to prevent more families from experiencing what we did." It matters if we're lying to ourselves about motives. Justice sounds noble. Revenge sounds petty. But maybe they're the same thing wearing different masks. Grace turned to face him close enough that he could see gold flecks in her eyes catching light from the city below. You want honesty? I want Ashford to suffer. I want him to lose everything like I lost Emily, like you lost Rebecca. I want him to understand what it feels like when systems you trusted betray you, when people with power use that power to destroy the vulnerable. Her voice went fierce. That's revenge, but it's also justice. Sometimes they're not opposites. And us, what are we? The question hung between them, demanding answer. Neither seemed ready to give. Partners, allies, two damaged people trying to build something good from catastrophic loss. Grace's hand found his. Maybe more, maybe not. Does it matter right now? It might, if we're making decisions based on feelings we haven't examined. Are you having second thoughts? About fighting Ashford numb? About... Ethan stopped, unable to finish. Grace finished for him, her voice soft. About whether you're ready to care about someone again. Whether I'm a partner or a replacement. Whether what we're building can survive when the crisis ends and we have to face normal life. Yes, all of that. I don't have answers. I know I respect you, trust you, need you in ways that terrify me because I spent 16 years not needing anyone. She paused. But I also know we're in the middle of a war. Examining feelings now might be self-indulgent when we should be focused on winning. Or it might be the only honest thing we've done. They stood in silence, hands linked, the question of what they were to each other suspended like a note waiting for resolution. Lily's voice from the doorway shattered the moment. Daddy, Miss Grace, I had a bad dream. They turned to find her standing in pajamas covered with stars, her elephant tucked under one arm, her face showing the fear that came from a child's nightmares bleeding into waking reality. Ethan crossed to her, knelt down. What did you dream about, baby? Bad people came and took you away. Said you were in trouble for telling truth. I tried to stop them, but I was too small. Tears tracked down her face. Fact. Are the bad people going to take you away? The question gutted him, because the answer was maybe. If Ashford's legal warfare succeeded, if the defamation suit bankrupted him, if criminal charges came from the Newark break-in, yes, bad people might take him away. Grace knelt beside them, her hand coming to rest on Lily's shoulder. The bad people are trying, but your daddy has good lawyers and federal agents protecting him. And me. I won't let anything happen to him, I promise. Mrs. Patterson says promises don't count unless you can keep them. Mrs. Patterson's smart, and I can keep this promise because I have resources the bad people don't expect. Money connections and the fact that I'm very angry and very stubborn. Grace smiled. Your daddy caught me when I fell. Now I'm catching him. That's what families do. Lily's eyes went wide. Are we a family? The question landed heavy, demanding truth in a moment that felt too fragile for lies. Grace glanced at Ethan, something passing between them that needed no words. We're becoming one, if that's okay with you. Lily considered this with the gravity of someone who understood she was being given a voice in decisions that shaped her world. Mommy's still my mommy. Always. Always. Grace's voice carried certainty. I'm not trying to replace her. I'm just trying to be here for you and your daddy. Okay. Lily yawned, the crisis of her nightmare fading in the comfort of adults who made her feel safe. Can I sleep with you guys tonight, all three together? Ethan and Grace exchanged looks that mixed surprise with something warmer. Yeah, baby, all three together. They relocated to Grace's bedroom, Lily between them in a bed that could have held 6 people, her small body taking up space that somehow felt exactly right. She fell asleep within minutes, breathing evening out into the peaceful rhythm of childhood. Grace's voice came quiet in the darkness. Is this okay? I don't want to overstep. This is more than okay. Ethan reached across Lily's sleeping form, found Grace's hand. This is family. They lay in silence, 3 people bound by loss and purpose, and the fragile hope that maybe despite everything they could build something good from ruins. Morning brought news that shattered any illusion of peace. Agent Santos called at 7 a.m., her voice carrying urgency that meant nothing good. "Ethan, we have a situation. Malcolm Ashford disappeared 12 hours ago. Private jet filed flight plan to Ecuador. No extradition treaty. His lawyers claim medical emergency requiring treatment abroad." Ethan sat up, careful not to wake Lily. "He's running. Looks that way. We've frozen his domestic assets, but he likely moved significant resources offshore months ago. Smart money says he never comes back to face charges." Santos's frustration bled through. "Bastard probably planned this the moment you went public." So he wins, escapes justice, leaves his victims with nothing. Not nothing. His facilities are shut down pending criminal investigation. His assets are frozen. His company's in free fall without leadership. He's lost his empire even if he avoided prison. She paused. "I know that's not the ending you wanted, but it's more than most corporate criminals face." The call ended, leaving Ethan staring at his phone and feeling the particular hollowness that came from incomplete victory. Grace had woken during the call, heard enough to understand. He ran. Ecuador. No extradition. Smart planning. Son of a bitch. Grace's laugh came bitter. He spent weeks threatening us with infinite resources and infinite patience. Then he ran the moment facing consequences became real. What do we do now? We keep fighting. His facilities are still shut down. Workers are still protected. The evidence we gathered still matters for civil suits and regulatory changes. He escaped criminal charges, but he lost everything else. That's not enough. No, but it's what we have. Grace's hand found his across Lily's sleeping form. We keep fighting, for the people who come after, for the laws that need changing, for the system that let him run. Justice isn't always jail time. Sometimes it's making sure the next Ashford can't do what this one did. Her words made sense logically. Emotionally, Ethan wanted Ashford in prison, wanted him to face every family he'd destroyed, wanted satisfaction that would never come. Lily stirred, opened sleepy eyes. "Daddy, is everything okay?" He pulled her close, pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Everything's going to be okay, baby. The bad man ran away. He can't hurt anyone anymore." Did we win? The question demanded honesty that complicated simple victory narratives. We're winning. Not finished yet, but we're winning. She accepted this with the resilience of children who'd learned too young that adults didn't always have clean answers. "Mrs. Patterson says winning is doing your best even when you don't get what you want. She says the trying matters more than the getting." "Mrs. Patterson's very wise. I know, I keep telling you that." Despite everything, despite Ashford escaping and the long fight ahead and the uncertain future, Ethan found himself smiling. Because his daughter was safe. Because Grace had chosen to stand beside them. Because they'd exposed truth and changed systems and proved that corporations couldn't buy silence forever. It wasn't the ending he'd wanted, but maybe in a world where justice came imperfect and victories arrived incomplete, it was the ending they'd earned.